On a cold, windless night, the guillotine stood tall in the town square of Baskerville, its blade gleaming under the gray sky. Bound beneath it was a man whose loyalty had once been beyond question, Vicar Van Baskerville, the family's most faithful hound. A tool forged in shadows, trained to carry out the Baskerville family's dirtiest deeds, he now knelt in disgrace, falsely accused of consorting with the Demon Clan. He had committed no such crime. He was no traitor. His only sin had been loyalty that became inconvenient the moment he learned secrets meant to stay buried. As the blade descended, Vicar met his fate without flinching. But just before the cold kiss of death reached him, he swore an oath in the depths of his heart. If I am born again, I will never live as a hound again. I will bite back. When Vicar opened his eyes again, everything was wrong. His vision was blurry. His limbs were weak and small. The world was loud with the cries of infants, and the ceiling above him unfamiliar. It took a moment for the realization to sink in. He was in a nursery. Reborn. A baby. Was this hell? As he tried to make sense of his situation, the door opened and in walked Hugo La Baskerville, the man responsible for his death. The patriarch inspected the crying newborns with a look of disdain, dismissing most as worthless. But when his eyes landed on the quiet, coldly glaring baby that was Vicar, something changed. This one. Move him to the Cradle of Swords, Hugo ordered. The Cradle of Swords, a brutal trial every Baskerville heir was subjected to. It was said that only those with strong will and potential survived. Hugo must have seen something in Vicar's eyes. Perhaps he sensed the hatred. Vicar, even in his infant body, recognized Hugo. Rage burned inside him like a cursed fire. The man who framed him. The man who executed him. The man he would one day destroy. The Cradle of Swords was a maze, a spiraling helix of blades meant to test newborns for strength and potential. Beyond it lay the river Styx, a legendary current said to temper the flesh into steel. But only a few could absorb its power. It chose the first and the strongest. In his past life, Vicar had failed this trial. Ousted by his half-siblings, he was denied the river's blessing. But this time, he was determined to be the first. He would monopolize the power of the Styx. With trembling limbs, he crawled through the labyrinth, blades nicking his skin and painting the floor with infant blood. At last, he plunged into the cold embrace of the river. Pain exploded through his tiny body as the enchanted water seeped into his wounds and bones. Outside, attendants screamed for him to come out. He'll die in there. Hugo simply laughed. Let the greedy pup drown if he wants. But Vicar endured. He gritted his teeth and forced his body to absorb more than it ever had before. After 7 agonizing minutes, Hugo himself pulled the nearly unconscious child out. Surprised to find baby teeth already sprouting, Hugo stared curiously at the boy. What's his name? Vicar Van Baskerville, the butler replied. Hugo smiled, amused. A greedy son has been born. Vicar, barely conscious, made one more vow. I'll grow fangs sharp enough to tear you apart. And when the day comes, I'll take your head with my own hands. Days passed. In the nursery, Vicar sat quietly in his crib, recovering from the ordeal. One morning, a maid entered, muttering under her breath. Why would Madame order this, for a bastard? She placed a wooden box beside Vicar and quickly left. The lid creaked open. 2 crimson-scaled vipers slithered out, bloody mambas, assassins born of venom. So, the madam wanted him dead. Vicar didn't flinch. With calculated precision, he grabbed the snakes by the throat and snapped their spines. His tiny hands trembled, but his fury burned steady. The next morning, the nannies found him sleeping peacefully beside the corpses of the vipers. Panic spread. The staff was tortured and executed. But no one ever learned the truth behind the assassination attempt. Only the young hound knew. 8 years later, Vicar had grown into a quiet yet terrifyingly intelligent boy. In swordsmanship class, the instructor lectured about the 4 levels of mastery: beginner, expert, graduate, and finally, swordmaster, the level Hugo had attained. Vicar paid little attention. He was lost in thought, calculating how long it would take to kill the man who ruined his life. The teacher noticed his distraction and smiled inwardly. This child, who had once endured 7 minutes in the Styx and killed 2 vipers in infancy, was a prodigy. A monster in the making. But not everyone was impressed. After class, 3 boys approached him, triplets known as Hugo's Trident. They were the ones who had once stabbed Vicar in the back during his escape in a former life. Highbrow, middlebrow, and lowbrow. All smug. All 9 years old. Still pretending to be strong, garbage van? Rumor says you killed snakes as a baby. Lies, right? Just stay out of our way. Vicar's eyes narrowed. He remembered their betrayal clearly. They would grow to become a thorn in his side, manipulating the family for Hugo's gain. But now he had another chance. Maybe it's time to pull those teeth early, he thought. Standing before the notorious triplets, highbrow, middlebrow, and lowbrow, Vicar was calm and collected. The three brothers, a year older than him and always full of cruel confidence, surrounded him with smug looks. One of them pulled out a small dagger, twirling it in his hand with amusement. They say if you soak in the Styx River long enough, he sneered, your body turns to steel. Let's see if that's true, bastard. The others laughed in agreement, eager to test the myth on the infamous garbage son of Baskerville. One of them grabbed Vicar from behind, clamping a hand over his mouth to silence him. 3 minutes, he said. If he endures that long, I'll eat my own hand. Vicar didn't resist. In fact, he played along, as if curious to see how far they would go. The knife came down. 1 minute passed. Then 3. Then 10. Not a drop of blood spilled. Vicar didn't even flinch. The triplets, baffled, slowly backed off. The myth was real. But as the one holding Vicar began to release him, a sudden, sharp pain shot through his hand. He recoiled, screaming, his finger was missing. And Vicar spat the severed digit onto the floor with a wicked grin. You said you'd eat your hand if I endured, didn't you? He said coldly, crimson eyes gleaming. Panic erupted. The other two scrambled to calm their brother down, shouting about finding a priest to reattach the finger. But Vicar wasn't interested. I'll let you go, he said, voice low and sharp. But only one of you. The triplets froze. Vicar threw the bloodied knife to the ground. Decide among yourselves. At least one of you should live, right? Then he turned and walked to the door. But be quick, he said without looking back. I don't have the patience to wait. Behind him, the room erupted in chaos. The triplets, now desperate, turned on each other, clawing and scrambling for the blade. Screams echoed as brother fought brother. Outside, Vicar leaned against the wall, listening with quiet satisfaction. So this is how the trident of Baskerville crumbles. In the Baskerville manor, head butler John Barrymore stood in the office of Patriarch Hugo La Baskerville, delivering the latest reports. The Moore clan has begun asserting control over the ruby mines, claiming territorial rights, he informed. Hugo brushed it off with a wave of his hand. Let them stir. We'll respond when they formally reach out. Barrymore then moved to more pressing news. Regarding the juvenile fortress evaluation, Master Vicar has scored the highest on the written exam. The practical assessment will be held in 5 days. Hugo's expression shifted slightly, interested now. And the boy's physical state? Healthy. In fact, Barrymore hesitated. There's been an incident. Hugo's eyes narrowed. There was a fight among the young heirs. Master Highbrow's teeth were shattered. Middlebrow's jaw was dislocated. Lowbrow lost his left index finger. They've been treated, but the emotional trauma remains. Those three were close, Hugo said, surprised. They wouldn't turn on each other. There was friction, Barrymore admitted. The cause was Master Vicar. A long silence filled the room. When Vicar entered the Patriarch's study, he wore a calm smile. Hugo greeted him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. You've grown, Hugo remarked. And yet, you've caused quite the mess. Vicar tilted his head. Didn't they receive medical treatment? I'm not talking about their bodies, Hugo said, eyes narrowing. I'm talking about the damage done to their hearts, the bonds between them, broken. You shattered something inside your brothers. Was that necessary? Vicar looked at him without remorse. What did I do wrong? You turned them into wrecks. Vicar's answer was sharp and defiant. I was stronger. Since when has being strong ever been wrong in this family? That gave Hugo pause. He leaned back in his chair and finally said, they forgave you, you know. Vicar blinked, briefly caught off guard. Forgiven? A memory flashed in his mind. Before his execution in his previous life, a young nun had come to Hugo. She was the daughter of a ruined noble family destroyed by the Baskervilles. Despite everything, she forgave Hugo with a smile. Hugo had sneered and replied back then. Forgiveness is a weapon of the weak, a consolation for those too powerless to exact revenge. Vicar echoed those same words now. Forgiveness is a shield for those without strength. I am not one of them. For a long moment, Hugo said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at his lips, and his eyes gleamed with something unsettling, approval. He turned to Barrymore. Let the boy take whatever he wants from the food storage. As much as he can carry. Thank you, Patriarch, Vicar replied smoothly. I'll take chocolates. As Vicar and Barrymore headed toward the pantry, the butler explained, these are high-grade chocolates. The Moore clan secured them with great difficulty, they're a delicacy favored by the Germain royalty. But Vicar's expression turned cold. I don't want anything processed. Barrymore blinked. Pardon? I want the raw, Vicar said, staring ahead. Not something passed through others' hands. Barrymore realized something at that moment: this child wasn't like the others. His taste wasn't for sweets or approval. It was for something much darker. Vicar requested something specific: raw cacao beans, ones that carried a rich, deep aroma. The head butler was puzzled by the strange request, but said nothing and had them fetched at once. When the dark, oblong beans were finally presented, Vicar took one between his fingers and placed it in his mouth. The bitter taste hit him instantly, but he didn't flinch. Nearby, the chef couldn't help but explain, "These are known as bloody beans. Just one of these can yield 100 liters of chocolate. Not exactly something you eat raw." The head butler watched silently as Vicar chewed the bean, the bitterness enough to make most people gag. He quietly concluded that the boy must truly love chocolate. Perhaps this was his way of hoarding large amounts for later, by consuming the source directly. The chef offered to have the beans processed and delivered to Vicar's quarters in fine chocolate form. But Vicar simply shook his head. "No. I'll take them as they are." Both the chef and the butler exchanged confused glances. His tastes, they assumed, must be eccentric, maybe even extreme. But Vicar had no interest in indulging a sweet tooth. He had no desire for the chocolate. He simply had a plan. One that involved those very beans. A plan for the practical exam, set to begin in 5 days. No one around him realized that a storm was about to erupt, one that would leave a mark on the Baskerville family's long, blood-soaked history. The Baskervilles, feared across the continent, were known as the Berserker clan for a reason. Their strength wasn't inherited, it was forged through torment. The training of a Baskerville child began the moment they could walk. From that day forward, their lives became a test of endurance. They were made to climb treacherous mountains without pause, forbidden to rest unless given explicit permission. When sleep finally came, it was in the company of death. They were forced to rest beside monster carcasses, to grow used to the stench of rot and the cold grip of fear. This wasn't just training. It was indoctrination. The goal was simple: to raise warriors who felt no fear, showed no weakness, and broke only the bones of others. Once a child turned 8, the true ordeal began. Every eligible child was brought to the outskirts of Baskerville territory, to a savage and untamed place known as Le Rouge et Le Noir Mountain. A forbidden zone brimming with bloodthirsty beasts, it was the designated battlefield for their final test. That day, the young hounds stood gathered before their instructor, the infamous shadow dog, Pava Van Baskerville. Cloaked in darkness, with eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh, Pava laid down the rules with a voice as cold as the mountain winds. "Your task is survival. You will be abandoned here for 1 month. Within that time, hunt monsters. Survive. And prove yourselves." He then outlined the scoring system. 10 points just for making it through alive. 30 points if they survived without any lasting injuries. 50 points if they defeated other participants and remained standing. 70 points for slaying a large monster and living to tell the tale. And if someone managed all of the above, they'd earn 90 points. "There are number 100 points, Pava stated sharply. "A swordsman who seeks perfection will die the moment arrogance clouds his blade." He then gestured to the badges each of them wore. "If you steal a badge from someone else, you'll earn bonus points. But if you die, you receive nothing." His voice turned colder. "And do not venture outside the restricted zone. That mountain holds things even the elders fear. Keep within the mapped area where monsters have been subdued. You are not yet strong enough to face what lies beyond." Unseen by the children, the mountain had already been seeded with shadow dogs, elite assassins who would monitor and secretly grade the young heirs during their trial. Among the crowd, many young Baskervilles glanced toward Vicar, whispering to one another. Tales of his early feats had spread like wildfire: a child who survived 7 minutes in the Styx River, who killed 2 vipers with his bare hands as an infant, and who shattered the unity of Hugo's infamous triplet sons. But while others gossiped and stared, Vicar stood silent. His eyes scanned the dense, looming woods of the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain. He had been here before. In his previous life, this mountain was where many of his peers had either risen or been buried. It was where betrayals were born, and blood soaked the soil long before the month was over. Now, he was returning with a mind sharper than any blade, and a handful of cacao beans that no one suspected could be used for anything other than sweets. This time, he wouldn't just survive. He'd dominate. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the exam, the mountain erupted into chaos. The young heirs of the Baskerville clan scattered like wolves in a forest, each one racing to claim a strategic position before the others could. Some had carefully planned their routes in advance, aiming to revisit the spots from the previous year's test. Others, unsure of their own strength, tailed the more confident participants, hoping to seize their advantage once they were vulnerable. The triplets, standing near Vicar, were visibly shaken. Beads of sweat clung to their brows, their usual bravado dissolved into nervous muttering. They couldn't agree on a single plan, each one wanting to lead, each one craving glory. Their bickering only made them look weaker. Watching from the shadows, the instructor, Pava van Baskerville, the clan's legendary shadow dog, narrowed his eyes. While fighting was encouraged to gauge survival instinct and skill, killing was frowned upon. Anyone who crossed that line would see their points slashed. Pava and his fellow shadow watchers had a difficult mission: observe the test, grade the participants, and prevent unnecessary bloodshed. One shadow dog had been tasked with keeping an eye on Vicar, the bastard son who had drawn more attention than any other. As he trailed the boy, he noticed something odd: Vicar wasn't heading into battle like the others. Instead, he was slipping into a forbidden zone at the far edge of the examination field. The shadow agent's curiosity piqued. Was this the famed prodigy who'd made waves since infancy? Vicar stopped beneath a massive tree, surveying the area with calm precision. He tested the softness of the earth, considered the canopy above, then nodded to himself. It would make an ideal temporary base. While the other participants rushed to hunt and clash, Vicar calmly began gathering sticks, crafting tools, and practicing sword motions with a wooden branch. Later that day, he laid under the tree and drifted into sleep. The hidden observer grew restless. Hours passed, and Vicar hadn't so much as drawn a weapon in combat. The shadow began to doubt the boy's reputation. Was this just another clever slacker hoping to hide his way to survival? Disappointed, the shadow finally left to find someone more active. The moment his presence faded, Vicar's lips curled into a grin. At last, he whispered to himself, "I can finally work." He tossed a few raw cacao beans, bloody beans, into the fire, savoring the familiar, bitter scent as they burned. The warmth of the fire, the solitude, the scent of roasted beans, it reminded him of a simpler time during his first life, back when he'd camped with comrades, not enemies. His preparations were complete. It was time to hunt. Days later, he ventured deeper into the off-limits territory. Every step triggered memories. He'd been here once before, many years ago, during a recon mission. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then came the stench of scorched wood, burnt roots, charred grass, and singed bark. He spotted the unmistakable sign, a blackened clump of dung still smoldering. A particular kind of beast left those behind. A hellhound. The ground trembled. Flames lit the edges of the forest. A towering hound emerged, its jaws crackling with sulfuric flame, its eyes glowing with infernal fury. It stood 3 meters tall, coated in soot and shadow. This wasn't just any monster. It was a B+ ranked nightmare. A beast whose flames devoured flesh and bone until nothing remained. Vicar's breath caught in his throat. He had faced one of these before, when he was 18. Back then, he barely lived to tell the tale. But now, he was only 8. There was no way to fight it directly. But he didn't need to. As the creature roared and lunged, Vicar sidestepped at the last second. One weakness of hellhounds: they could only charge in straight lines. Their bodies were too rigid to turn quickly. Next, Vicar dropped a flask of water at his feet. Another known flaw: they wouldn't cross even shallow water. The hound, slowed by the barrier, looped wide in frustration. Time bought. Opportunity made. And then, the killing move. With perfect timing, Vicar hurled a bloody bean straight into the creature's open maw. The reaction was instant. The hound staggered, choked, and collapsed with a whimper. Chocolate, lethal to canines. And this bean wasn't ordinary, it had the potency to produce 100 liters of it. Weaponized chocolate. Only Vicar would think of that. Seizing the moment, he darted forward and drove his blade between the creature's ribs, aiming precisely for its kidneys, the one place its fiery armor didn't reach. The hellhound crumpled. As the beast died, a surge of energy pulsed through Vicar's body. Karma. Power. His blade suddenly felt lighter, his muscles tighter. He was catching up to the strength he once held before being reborn. Smirking, he cut off the creature's head. Just imagining Hugo's expression when an 8-year-old presented him with the head of a B+ monster filled him with satisfaction. But his victory celebration was cut short. Snarls echoed from the tree-line. More hellhounds. A pack. They circled him, eyes burning with rage and grief, drawn by the scent of their fallen kin. Vicar reached for his sword. His pouch still held several more beans. He was ready. Yet, the beasts didn't attack. They stopped. Snarled. Whimpered. Trembled. Vicar narrowed his eyes. Hellhounds never hesitated. Never backed down. Then he felt it. The air shifted. A chill swept through the forest. Behind him, the earth trembled, and the hellhounds began retreating in terror. He turned around, and froze. Towering above him stood a Cerberus, the mythical 3-headed guardian of the underworld. Its massive, 7-meter body was torn and bleeding. Arrows stuck from its flanks. Its breath came in wheezing gasps. Someone had been hunting it. And it had fled here, by sheer chance or cruel fate. Cerberus, the A+ ranked lookout monster. Even wounded, it was leagues above anything Vicar had fought. But he saw opportunity. The beast staggered. He struck. With practiced footwork and honed technique, Vicar sliced across its hide, landing a series of rapid blows. His swordsmanship, refined in wars against demons in his previous life, allowed him to keep up. Even injured, Cerberus was formidable, but this wasn't the Vicar of old. This was a reborn warrior, with knowledge no child should possess. His blade bit deep. But in a moment of complacency, he slipped. Cerberus retaliated. Its claw shattered his sword. The second swipe hurled him through the air like a rag doll. He crashed into a tree with a sickening crack, blood pouring from his mouth. He lay still, body broken. Pain burned through his left arm. For a horrifying moment, he thought it had been torn off, but it was still there. Barely. The blessing of the Styx River had spared him from dismemberment. But it couldn't protect him forever. Cerberus loomed again. Vicar, bruised and bleeding, knew he couldn't take another hit. Not without dying. So he did the only thing a hunter could do when faced with death: he ran. He sprinted through the forest, branches tearing at his skin, his heart thundering in his ears. He needed a way out. A miracle. Then he saw it. An old, rusted iron fence, half buried in the earth. If he could make it past the barrier, he'd cross out of the restricted zone, where the shadows watched and help might reach him. It wasn't victory. But it was survival. Vicar pushed his exhausted body forward, his breath ragged, lungs burning, but he didn't stop. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and sheer will, he sprinted with everything he had, tearing through the thick underbrush. Just as the towering Cerberus lunged from behind, jaws gaping wide with murderous intent, Vicar dove through a jagged iron gate. His chest heaved with relief. The iron barrier marked the boundary of the restricted zone. But he knew this wasn't over. He hadn't escaped death just yet. He needed to reach the refuge he'd prepared in secret before this mission even began. Every movement was calculated, every step carrying the weight of survival. Vicar scanned the dark woods frantically, his instincts sharp. His heart thumped in his ears, not from exertion alone, but from the looming presence behind him. Then he saw it, the hidden trap. A pit, cleverly disguised with fallen leaves and branches. Without a moment's hesitation, Vicar darted forward. Cerberus lunged again, only to miss by inches, as Vicar rolled aside. The beast's massive weight sent it plummeting into the concealed pit, where a dense thicket of wooden spears awaited. Vicar rose to his feet, a grim smile flickering across his face. His foresight had saved him. The spears hadn't been ordinary. Before the trial even began, he had carefully coated their tips with an extract made from bloody beans, a deadly substance poisonous to canine monsters. It was the same bean that could produce over 100 liters of chocolate but also acted as a potent toxin for creatures like Cerberus. Vicar had come prepared for a war, not a game. Cerberus, trapped in the pit, snarled and writhed, white foam dripping from its fanged mouths as the toxin took effect. But Vicar wasn't done. He gripped a hand-carved wooden spear, its tip far more sinister than the rest. This one bore the fang of a bloody mamba, a rare, deadly snake whose venom paralyzed after precisely 7 steps. Vicar had preserved the fang since childhood, waiting for a moment just like this. With careful aim, he hurled the spear directly into the beast's side. Cerberus growled and began dragging its enormous frame out of the pit, advancing toward him. 1 step. 2. 3. Vicar stood still, his eyes locked. 4. 5. 6. 7. Then, collapse. The 3-headed hound crumpled to the forest floor with a low, dying moan. Its limbs twitched once. Then silence. Vicar exhaled sharply, releasing a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He cautiously approached the fallen monster. The energy radiating from its massive corpse pulsed in the air, then flowed into him, thick and overwhelming like a tide. Experience. Karma. Strength. It filled his body to the brim. He had done it. A beast ranked A+, one of the continent's most feared gatekeeper monsters, lay dead at his feet, killed by a single child. But now, a new problem arose: what to do with the body? The Cerberus's corpse was massive, undeniable evidence of Vicar's incredible feat, but how would he move it? How would he prove it? Perhaps the guardian knight who had once seen him preparing the spears might serve as a witness. The thought lingered only briefly. Because something else began to claw at his attention. Cerberus was a gatekeeper. Which meant it had been guarding something. A dungeon. His heartbeat spiked again, this time not from fear, but anticipation. Dungeons were ancient vaults of monsters, magic, and treasure. And this one, hidden deep within forbidden territory, might be untouched. But before exploring, Vicar needed a way to keep the other monsters at bay. Without hesitation, he scooped up some of the Cerberus's dung, foul, steaming, and putrid, and smeared it onto his clothes and skin. Disgusting, yes. But the scent would act as a repellent to minor beasts. It was a survival tactic he'd learned long ago. With the stench now cloaking him like armor, Vikir followed the trail Cerberus had left. Each crushed leaf, every patch of scorched ground, told a story. He retraced the creature's path with the instincts of a seasoned hunter. Eventually, the terrain changed. The earth beneath his feet felt warmer, the air heavier with latent mana. He had found it. The hidden dungeon. A massive, weathered crevice in the rock face opened up like a forgotten wound in the land. Vikir's crimson eyes gleamed in the gloom. This wasn't just a simple cave. He'd seen this place before, in his past life, 10 years into the future. But back then, it had already been looted. Its core, its treasures, all stripped away by adventurers and noble scavengers. Not this time. Now, it was untouched. Brimming with power. He stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him. The deeper he ventured, the more oppressive the air became. No light reached this far. Only silence and the subtle hum of magical energy. But he pressed on. Soon, faint glimmers of red reflected from the stone walls. Embedded in the surfaces were ruby veins, rich and unmined. This dungeon was likely connected to Red or Mountain, another territory loaded with mana-rich minerals. A true treasure trove. As Vikir delved further, the narrow tunnel expanded into a vast chamber, brilliantly lit by an unseen source. His eyes took a moment to adjust. And then, he grinned. Whatever lay ahead, it was worth the risk. Vikir stepped into the heart of the chamber, and his breath caught at the sight before him. In the center of the vast, echoing room stood a towering stone pedestal, atop which rested an enormous crimson gemstone. The ruby pulsed faintly with light, bathing the entire space in a soft, red glow. It wasn't an ordinary jewel, he could feel the magical energy radiating from it, thick and dense. The brilliance of the stone seemed almost alive, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. But the wonder of the moment was short-lived. At the base of the pedestal, partially buried under layers of dust and decay, Vikir spotted a lifeless skeleton. The remains were brittle and pale, bones twisted at odd angles, their surfaces stained with the dark rust brown of long-dried blood. Jagged gashes marked the ribs, and Vikir could tell the wounds had been deep, lethal. Someone had perished here, and not recently. Beside the corpse lay a tattered envelope, yellowed with age. Curious, Vikir knelt down and retrieved it, carefully unfolding the brittle parchment inside. The ink was faded, but still legible. The letter began with a strange preface. I do not wish to stain this white paper with my cursed name. But if you must know, I was called Cain. As Vikir read on, a chill settled in his spine. The handwriting, sharp, precise, yet deeply emotional, was unmistakably from someone of the Baskerville bloodline. He could tell just by the controlled pressure of the strokes. That alone narrowed down the possibilities. The letter, written by Cain, told a grim tale of desperation and regret. Cain and his brother, Abel, twins, had discovered this hidden dungeon years ago. It had long been whispered about among the older generations of the Baskerville family, a forbidden, stone chamber, said to house a treasure of unimaginable value. Driven by ambition and curiosity, the two brothers had entered the dungeon together and braved its brutal trials, monsters, traps, and mind-bending illusions. They succeeded in overcoming every test, and eventually reached the final chamber, the very one Vikir now stood in. But the last riddle had trapped them here. When entering, it is one. Once inside, it becomes two. Upon leaving, it is one again. Cain wrote that they had agonized over the meaning for years, 3 whole years, trapped, slowly starving, their bodies deteriorating while their minds teetered on the edge of madness. They came to a haunting conclusion: since they were twins, born from one womb but now two separate beings, only one could be allowed to exist to leave with the treasure. In desperation, Cain had killed Abel. He had taken his brother's life, believing that by doing so, he would satisfy the condition of becoming one again. But the treasure did not reveal itself. Nothing happened. No hidden path. No magic light. No reward. Just silence. In the letter's final passages, Cain's words grew bitter and sorrowful. There is no treasure in this place. Only torment. Only regret. Turn back. Leave this cursed chamber before it breaks you too. Vikir slowly folded the letter again and placed it beside the skeletal remains. He sat there for a while, staring at the ruby's glow. His mind was whirling. Unlike Cain, he didn't have a twin. He wasn't, too. So why had the chamber accepted him? Why had the riddle remained unchanged? He muttered the riddle aloud once more, his voice barely above a whisper. When entering, it is one, once inside, it becomes two, and when leaving, it is one again. Cain and Abel had believed it referred to themselves, that one had to kill the other. But Vikir felt deep down that they had misunderstood something crucial. He stood and walked around the chamber, slowly examining every carving, every crack in the stone. His eyes lingered on the ruby at the center. Could the two mean something else entirely? Was it symbolic? Physical? He clenched his fists, frustrated but focused. There was always a solution. He refused to believe the dungeon was unbeatable. There was no such thing. Vikir turned back toward the remains, his gaze intense. He would not die here. And he would not repeat Cain's mistake. A sudden spark ignited in Vikir's mind, an insight that cut through the cloud of confusion like lightning. Reflecting on the tragic fate of Cain and Abel, he realized their downfall had stemmed from a fundamental flaw in their thinking. They had interpreted the riddle too literally, bound by the idea that they were two separate beings who needed to become one. He turned to face the large ruby glowing in the center of the chamber and let his gaze wander back toward the narrow, dim corridor he had entered through. As he replayed the riddle in his mind. When entering, it is one. Once inside, it becomes two. When leaving, it is one again. It all clicked into place. It's not about people, Vikir murmured, walking toward the ruby. It's about the self, about perception. About light and darkness. He stepped into the center of the chamber, where the ruby's magical illumination fell directly on him. There, cast across the stone floor, was his shadow, sharp and distinct. When I entered, I was one, he muttered, eyes following his silhouette. But when light reveals my shadow, I become two. He now understood. The riddle wasn't about a pair of individuals, but the transformation of the self under light. The two was simply the person and their shadow. And when that light was removed, the shadow would vanish, leaving one once more. His eyes narrowed. The shadow, that's the answer. With calm resolve, Vikir reached out and shattered the ruby with a single strike of his fist. A blinding light burst forth as the gemstone cracked, momentarily filling the room with a radiant glow. As the light died down, the chamber trembled. The floor split apart to reveal a hidden vault beneath, slowly lifting a pedestal from the ground. Upon it rested a weapon that made Vikir's heart skip a beat. A sword, ominous and wicked, its presence alone enough to make the air feel heavier. Black as pitch, it radiated a corrupted, pulsating aura. Dark mist clung to its blade like oil in water. Vikir stepped forward cautiously, his instincts screaming that what stood before him was not merely a weapon, but a curse wrapped in steel. Carved into the obsidian pedestal were words written in an ancient tongue. He translated them silently. Only one who carries the blood of Baskerville may claim Beelzebub. His breath hitched. Beelzebub? Vikir whispered in disbelief. The name clawed at the corners of his memory, dredging up stories from long ago, half-believed fairy tales read in the dim candlelight of his childhood. He remembered the gluttonous fly, the harbinger of famine, one of the mythical 7 calamities, the devil's holy constellations. The Beelzebub of legend had once descended upon the continent, bringing ruin and madness, and it was said that the founding heads of the 7 great clans had joined forces to seal it away. Many dismissed the tale as fiction, but Vikir now understood, it was real. The sword before him wasn't a relic. It was a remnant. A cursed weapon forged from the remains of a calamity. He gritted his teeth. This was taken by the demon clans in my last life, and used to slaughter thousands of humans on the battlefield. The thought of that history repeating itself made his blood boil. Vikir grasped the hilt. At first, nothing happened. Then, like a coiling snake, something cold and vile slithered up his arm. He gasped, eyes widening as dark energy surged into his palm. The sword melted into black vapor and vanished, only to reappear seconds later, fused with his very body. A black pattern spread across his arm like branded veins. When he extended his hand, the sword emerged instantly from within his flesh, like it had always belonged there. The power that coursed through him was intoxicating. Beelzebub was no ordinary blade, it was alive. And it had chosen him. Vikir stared at it in awe. A weapon born from a devil's corpse, he muttered. No wonder it feels like it's devouring the air around me. A grin crept across his face. With a tool like this, the strength he could achieve in this life would far surpass what he had known before. The road to vengeance and dominance had just gained a dangerous new ally. Satisfied that the dungeon held no further secrets, Vikir turned to leave, but as he stepped back toward the surface, something shifted within him. A wave of weakness crashed over his body. His knees buckled, and he collapsed, one hand gripping his stomach. A deep, gnawing pain twisted in his gut, not his own hunger, but something far darker. A low voice echoed in his mind, cold, ancient, and insatiable. Feed me. Vikir's expression darkened as he understood the truth. It wasn't he who was starving. It was Beelzebub. And the sword's hunger had only just begun. A peculiar sensation prickled at Vikir's senses. His nose twitched involuntarily, picking up faint, distant scents that had never been detectable before. He wondered for a moment if his sense of smell had evolved, perhaps influenced by his bond with the demonic weapon now fused to his arm. Just then, Beelzebub, the cursed sword, tugged at him. Though it had no voice, its will was strong, pulling Vikir's arm forward like an eager child. Startled yet intrigued, Vikir allowed himself to be guided, racing through the forest under Beelzebub's invisible pull. The trail led him back to a place he had visited before. He stopped abruptly. There, lying cold and still, was the body of the hellhound he had slain earlier. Vikir's eyes narrowed in curiosity. Beelzebub began to hum softly, a low vibration traveling up his arm. As he raised the sword, its hunger became palpable. Without hesitation, the blade extended toward the corpse. The moment it touched the carcass, Beelzebub pulsed violently and began absorbing the blood left within the creature's body. Vikir watched, both fascinated and disturbed, as the sword fed greedily, its hunger temporarily quelled with each pulse of crimson energy. A strange thought crossed his mind: had Beelzebub's unquenchable thirst caused the land itself to wither? He'd noticed how the mountain soil nearby had become brittle and dry. Was the sword leeching not just life but vitality from its surroundings? The sword's devouring slowed, and with a contented hum, it fell still. Vikir glanced at it. "So that's how you feed," he murmured, frustration flickering across his expression. Beelzebub's appetite was both a gift and a burden. The silence was broken by a cheerful, almost childlike cry from the sword, as if it had just finished a satisfying meal. Now that the weapon was calm, Vikir took the opportunity to examine its abilities. He looked at the 3 dark slots embedded into the blade's spine, each one gradually glowing as it filled. The sword's innate skill, glutton of flies, allowed it to absorb the abilities of enemies it killed. A terrifying gift in the hands of a skilled warrior. Though it could absorb endlessly, only 3 abilities could be equipped at once. Vikir checked the first slot. It now held Hemorrhage, Hellhound, B+, a brutal skill that allowed the sword to continually drain an enemy's blood through even the smallest of cuts. Impressive, Vikir muttered. His eyes shifted to the corpse of the Cerberus nearby. It was still mostly intact, and Beelzebub began to twitch again, reaching for it. Vikir immediately stepped forward and tapped the blade lightly. "Not so fast," he warned. "If you devour everything, they'll start asking questions during the autopsy." Beelzebub let out a sharp whine, almost as if it were protesting. "Enough," Vikir said firmly. Despite the complaint, the sword obeyed. As he examined the rest of the sword slots, Vikir discovered 2 more newly acquired abilities. Burn Injury, Cerberus, A+, which inflicted intense thermal damage on the enemy, capable of replicating the agony of fire itself. High-Speed Regeneration, Norvik Sewer Rat, F, a minor but useful ability he hadn't even noticed until now. He spotted the crushed corpse of a small rodent beneath the Cerberus and smirked. Apparently, Beelzebub had devoured it too during its frenzy. Not bad, he thought. Even the smallest creature can provide value. The skills now stored in Beelzebub made it a truly terrifying weapon, wounding, burning, and healing in unison. With nothing left to gather, Vikir cleaned the area and prepared the Cerberus body to be submitted for the practical exam. It was intact enough to prove his accomplishment, and with the battle over, he chose to remain in the forest until the evaluation was complete. Several days later, the young hounds returned to Baskerville Castle. There, in the Grand Hall, awaited their rewards: swords, shields, or amulets crafted from the monsters they had slain during their trials. But the attention of the entire room had gravitated to one particular tale. One hound had done something unheard of. Inside his study, Hugo Baskerville, the patriarch of the family, sat with an expression of disbelief. He turned to his head butler, eyebrows raised. "Repeat that," he said flatly. "Who brought down the Cerberus?" The head butler bowed respectfully. "Master Vikir van Baskerville. 8 years old. He's the one who submitted the corpse of the Cerberus, an A+ class threat. The same monster that crossed into the restricted zone during the trial." For a moment, silence stretched in the room. Then Hugo leaned back in his chair, amused. "Even the Guardian Knights hesitate to deal with that beast," he said. The butler nodded. "We found that it had been previously wounded by the barbarian tribes. According to the journal, young Master Vikir finished the job using a poisoned wooden spear, but we have no record of what kind of poison it was or where he acquired it." "I see," Hugo said, eyes twinkling with interest. "Information is a currency, and the boy's already hoarding it." The butler added, he returned to the dormitory saying he was tired and refused to answer questions. Hugo chuckled under his breath. "A cunning little brat," he said. "Scheming like that at his age." The butler hesitated, then said, "If I may. I find it surprising that such talent comes from someone bearing the name Van rather than La." Hugo's expression turned serious. "Bloodline means nothing to me," he said. "I raise hounds by merit. If a mutt outpaces a purebred, then so be it." The butler bowed again. Understood, sir. But beneath the patriarch's calm exterior, a shadow of thought passed. His second son was entering isolation training soon, one of the most dangerous and sacred rites in the family. Would the rising star named Vikir upset the balance of expectations? He didn't voice the thought, but the idea lingered. The boy who brought down a Cerberus might be more than just a prodigy. The head butler quickly bowed his head, murmuring a quiet apology for overstepping, though he kept his true thoughts to himself. Hugo merely waved a hand to dismiss it with a dry chuckle, saying, "Forget it. What I need now is something, or someone, to lift my mood." The butler, catching the hint, nodded. "I'll summon Master Vikir." Soon after, Vikir stood before Hugo Baskerville, calm and composed. Despite being in the presence of the fearsome patriarch of the clan, the boy betrayed no hint of anxiety. His back was straight, his eyes clear. Hugo regarded the child curiously. "So," he began, "how exactly did you manage to bring down the Cerberus during the trial?" Without hesitation, Vikir answered, "I poisoned the wooden spear with chocolate. It's toxic to canine-type monsters." The response was so matter-of-fact, so relaxed, that Hugo blinked in surprise. A small smile crept onto his face as he recalled the boy's earlier request for chocolate before the practical exam. So that was his plan all along. Standing nearby, the head butler was left stunned, not only by Vikir's answer, but by the strange lack of traditional greetings or formal respect exchanged between father and son. It didn't feel like a conversation between a subordinate and the patriarch. No, this felt like a negotiation between equals. Hugo continued, his curiosity piqued. "And why didn't you explain yourself to the butler earlier when he asked about the hunt?" Vikir didn't hesitate. "Because he's not my master." Raising an eyebrow, Hugo asked dryly, "Then who do you consider your master?" "I serve the clan," Vikir replied simply. "Whoever leads the clan is my master." A satisfied grin tugged at Hugo's lips. He leaned back in his chair, clearly entertained by the boy's boldness. "Well said. As a reward for your performance in the trial, the Cerberus corpse is yours to claim. And as the top scorer, you've earned the right to make a wish." Vikir's eyes lit up. He already knew what he wanted. With unwavering clarity, he declared, "I want access to the 10,000 epistle library." The entire room went still. Hugo leaned forward, visibly intrigued by the boy's unusual request. The 10,000 epistle library was a sacred vault of knowledge, one of the most heavily guarded libraries in the Empire, situated at the heart of the Baskerville estate. "That's a tall request," Hugo remarked. "Only the patriarch, the deputy head, and their direct descendants are allowed entry." Vikir remained respectful but resolute. "If it cannot be granted, I'll withdraw the request." But in his heart, he was already scheming a way to enter regardless of approval. To his surprise, Hugo gave a nod of approval. "You may enter." Vikir's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected to be granted permission, and yet Hugo wasn't finished. Once inside, the patriarch added, "Seek out the sixth sword technique. It's stored in the sixth sealed section. Read it." Vikir froze for a moment. Did he hear that correctly? The sixth technique? That was something no child with the name Van, a designation given to those outside the direct line, was ever permitted to learn. Traditionally, only legitimate heirs could study beyond the fourth technique. And yet here he was, an 8-year-old Van, being handed the opportunity of a lifetime. He managed to mask his emotions and nodded in thanks. But internally, his thoughts were racing. So it's come to this. Hugo himself had reached the seventh technique. Before his regression, Vikir remembered Hugo wielding the fearsome 9 Fang style in battle. And yet now, Vikir had just been handed access to the sixth step. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a key. A key that would lead him closer to the true treasure of the clan, the Baskerville Master Text, the complete codex left behind by the clan's founding patriarch. It contained the swordsmanship that had once brought the 7 great disasters to their knees. That book. Vikir swore he would obtain it one day, and Hugo himself would be the one to hand it over. With a faint smile, Hugo dismissed him with a casual, "Good luck." Vikir gave a deep bow, thanked him quietly, and turned to leave. He has no idea what he's just given me, Vikir thought, his heart pounding with restrained excitement. But I'll make it count. The 10,000 epistle library was more vast and magnificent than he had ever imagined. It was like a maze of ancient wisdom, floor upon floor lined with forgotten knowledge. As he explored, his fingers trailed across the spines of ancient books. He read their titles aloud under his breath. Severing incisors. Grinding molars. Piercing canines. Snaggletooth that embeds twice. Wisdom fang that bends. Each of these was a technique, parts of the legendary Baskerville sword style that he had once craved to learn in his previous life. But no matter how much mana you had, or how talented you were. Those with the Van title had always been barred from studying anything beyond the 4th level. It was a safeguard, one meant to keep the lower hounds loyal, unable to turn their blades against the family's true leaders. But now? Now he had been invited past that threshold. Eventually, he reached a secluded section, where a single book rested under heavy iron chains. A thick lock was bolted across its middle, as if daring someone to try opening it. He stared at it. This must be it. The 6th sword technique. Carefully, he unlocked the mechanism and opened the cover. Vikir's eyes narrowed. Of course Hugo allowed this. He probably thinks a child, an illegitimate child at that, won't be able to absorb it all in a single day. But Vikir wasn't just any child. Before his regression, he had devoured the theory behind the first 4 techniques until he could recite them backward. He had even dissected the structure of the 5th. He wasn't starting from scratch. As he read the 6th technique, the gears in his mind began to turn rapidly. And then, he saw it. A realization dawned. A connection formed. The hidden intent behind the swordplay, the gap between movement and intent, began to click into place. And Vikir smiled. He had come farther than anyone expected. And this time, he would go farther still. After channeling his aura into the 4th tooth, Vikir had made a critical mistake. He didn't cut off the flow of mana at the right moment. That small oversight might have been the reason he was unable to form the 5th tooth. The Baskerville sword style was unique in its structure. Each stage of mastery was represented by a growing number of fangs, 1 for the first technique, 2 for the second, and so on. With every progression, the user would manifest a crimson sword energy that sharpened both their weapon and their resolve. Despite being granted unprecedented access to the 6th technique, Vikir wasn't particularly interested in studying it at that moment. He hadn't come to the 10,000 epistle library just to indulge in conventional swordsmanship tomes. He was seeking something beyond that, something lost, forgotten, or hidden. Leaving behind the formal training section, Vikir exited the aisle that housed the family's official manuals. The guard station nearby blinked in surprise as he emerged so soon. "You're done already, Master Vikir?" one of them asked, stunned. "If you'd like, we can fetch more tomes from deeper inside. There are advanced sword techniques even deeper than the 6th, offered another, clearly trying to be helpful. But Vikir simply waved them off. "No need. I finished what I came for." Still baffled, the guards watched as he turned and strolled toward the far end of the Grand Library. One of them whispered, "That section's just full of miscellaneous rubbish. I'd rather dig into the deeper sword volumes if I were him." "Maybe he doesn't realize how valuable those books are," murmured the other, shaking his head. Vikir caught every word, but he didn't turn back or correct them. Let them think what they wanted. They had no idea that the so-called rubbish he was heading toward held something of far greater value than any of the officially sanctioned techniques. His eyes scanned the rows of dusty, neglected books until one spine stopped him cold. A lurking ambush. He reached for the old, frayed volume and gently pulled it free from the shelf. Its pages were brittle, many torn or barely clinging to the binding. Most would dismiss it as a damaged throwaway. But Vikir's expression turned grim with recognition. He had found the book he had been searching for. Before his regression, during his time in the Hound Squad, a single page had fallen into their hands, ripped, obscure, but unmistakably bearing the handwriting of a Baskerville ancestor. It was part of a forgotten swordsmanship manual. When Hugo, obsessed with recovering its source, had discovered that it belonged to a lurking ambush, he had gone mad trying to complete it. Vikir vividly remembered what followed. Hugo had dispatched hounds across the empire to retrieve the 6 missing pages, threatening and even waging war against the noble families who held them. Blood was spilled, lives were lost, scores of elite hounds sacrificed for the sake of mere parchment. When the final page was finally recovered, Hugo received it in silence, and then muttered only one thing. "Good job." That was it. No praise. No grief. No honor for the dead. The only reward was a muttered acknowledgement as Hugo broke past the 7th technique and eventually ascended to the 9th. But beneath that triumph lay a mountain of corpses and a river of blood. Vikir's grip tightened around the book as the memory surged. "That was a damned foolish way to live," he muttered under his breath. He couldn't let that tragedy repeat. He remembered the contents of the missing pages with perfect clarity. Even now, he could visualize each stroke, each annotation. And he understood then that his failure to progress past the 4th technique in his past life wasn't due to a lack of talent, but due to missing context. This book, in its incomplete form, was misleading. The techniques were fragmented, nonsensical. But the moment one inserted the lost pages, the moment the blanks were filled in, the entire manuscript transformed into a sublime masterpiece. Others would never see it that way. They would scoff at it, misinterpret it, ignore its secrets. But Vikir saw everything. Before his regression, he had reached the apex of aura mastery and climbed as high as the fourth technique would allow. Now, he was on a path to do it all again, and more. This time, there would be no gaps. No errors. No false steps. He set a new goal for himself. By the time he turned 15, he would reclaim every shred of power he had once lost. Time passed unnoticed as Vikir pored over the ancient book. The flickering torches dimmed. Silence settled over the library like dust. Eventually, the golden light of dawn spilled through the stained glass windows. Vikir blinked, his fingers finally releasing the aged tome. He hadn't realized the night had passed. He exhaled deeply. Not only had he found what he came for, he had memorized every word of it. And now, the path to surpassing even Hugo Baskerville lay open before him. As Vikir rose to his feet, he took a moment to observe his surroundings. The library was still and empty, the guardian knights who usually kept a watchful eye were nowhere to be seen. Realizing he was alone, he allowed himself a moment of calm reflection. He knew that his current body, young and underdeveloped, couldn't yet bear the strain of manifesting all 10 Baskerville fangs. But that wasn't his goal, at least not yet. What he sought now was to conquer the elusive fifth technique, something he had failed to grasp in his past life despite decades of effort. Focusing his breath and centering his mana, Vikir stepped before one of the imaginary statues he created standing silently within the vast halls of the library. A look of firm resolve crossed his face as he raised his hand, channeling all the power he could muster into his strikes. He began with the foundational moves, executing the first technique with precision, followed seamlessly by the second, third, and fourth. Each swing brought sharper strength, more fluid control. The room echoed with the crack of sword energy as he struck again and again. With every blow, fragments of his past returned to him. He remembered the countless hours he had dedicated to reaching the peak of graduate-level aura in his former life. Yet, no matter how hard he trained, the more advanced sword arts had remained locked behind prejudice and bloodlines. As an illegitimate child, he had been cast aside, denied the privilege of advancing beyond the fourth technique. That bitter truth had haunted him. But now, reborn with the wisdom of his previous life, he wasn't going to be held back again. Rage and determination surged in his veins as he unleashed his blade, visualizing Hugo's face engraved into the stone of the training statue. With a final, powerful strike, he cleaved clean through the stone, sending shards scattering. Had he done it? A strange warmth began to spread through his chest, rising to his throat. It was a burning sensation, hot, overwhelming, and alive. A smile crept across his lips, trembling slightly as he clenched his fists. For a brief moment, he felt as though tears might come. He had done it. He had manifested the fifth tooth. As if confirming this, he felt a painful yet exhilarating shift in his jaw. His canine tooth had begun to extend, symbolic of his growth as a hound. In Baskerville tradition, the fangs only grew sharper and longer when aimed at one's master. This alone was proof of his rapid advancement. He glanced at the mana now flowing inside him, no longer a crude solid but a dense, fluid energy, an unmistakable sign that he had ascended to the level of a graduate aura user. Something that had taken him 30 years in his previous life, he had now achieved at just 8 years old. With this surge in power, his body could move smoother, faster, and with greater control than ever before. His newfound strength didn't just surpass expectations, it obliterated them. The sword technique lurking ambush had always fascinated him. Its greatest strength was its versatility. He could now blend offense and defense in seamless transitions, perfect for overwhelming opponents without pause. It had no true limitations, and Vikir was determined to master it completely. Satisfied, he carefully placed the old book near the window and took a moment to appreciate how far he had come. He wasn't just stronger, he was smarter, faster, and far more cunning. He then turned his gaze to the sunlit window and pulled out a magnifying lens. Placing it at just the right angle over the book, he focused the sunlight onto the page. Slowly, deliberately, the paper began to blacken. A faint curl of smoke rose. Then flame. With a slight smirk, Vikir watched the fire catch. "Let's see Hugo and the others reach the 10th technique now," he whispered under his breath, watching the once precious text crumble to ash. He, of course, had memorized everything. But no one else would be able to replicate the path without the missing pieces. The scent of burning paper spread through the air. Moments later, the guards, alarmed, burst into the library. Seeing the smoldering remains, they demanded to know what had happened. Vikir's expression shifted into one of innocent regret. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. "I must have left the magnifying glass there without realizing the sunlight would start a fire." The guards exchanged nervous glances. They were well aware of the punishment that could fall on them for negligence. But instead of blaming Vikir, one of them quickly stepped forward. "No, Master Vikir. It's our fault. We should have been watching more closely." I'm just glad this part of the library only held unimportant texts, Vikir added lightly, further easing their concern. He then turned and asked with a knowing smile, weren't you dealing with the Moor clan and the ruby mines? I assumed you wouldn't have time for minor things like this. The guards exhaled in relief, happy to shift blame off themselves. You're right, young master. This will remain between us. Good, Vikir replied, starting to walk away. Let's not waste time on trivial matters. As he departed, the guards whispered among themselves, impressed by the young hound's poise. He's unusually mature, one said. Polite, respectful, he treats even workers like us with decency. But behind his retreating figure, Vikir's lips curled into a mischievous grin. Let them think what they want. Later, standing once again before Hugo in the Patriarch's office, Vikir was calm and collected. Hugo, ever watchful, asked, did you learn anything insightful in the library? With a cryptic smile, Vikir replied, yes. I discovered something warm, sharp, soft, and thick like honey. The head butler flinched. Hugo narrowed his eyes, his expression frozen. Aura. Only those who had awakened aura could describe it with such clarity. While most children train tirelessly for years and still failed to reach that point by the age of 15, this child, this illegitimate boy, was suggesting he had done it at 8. Impossible. Hugo laughed it off uneasily, refusing to believe it. Then why don't you show your father what you've learned, he asked, hiding his interest behind a mask of amusement. Vikir stepped forward with a polite nod. His face calm. His mind already several steps ahead. Vikir gave a calm nod when asked if he was ready, his face unreadable. Soon after, he was led into a wide, Colosseum-style arena, where rows of young hounds sat watching curiously. In the center of the circular field, Vikir stood alone, a sword gripped firmly in his hand. At the edge of the stands, the head butler leaned over to Hugo, lowering his voice. How do you plan to test him, my lord? Hugo didn't even glance at him. I've prepared a proper opponent, a hungry one. Let's see what he's learned. The head butler blinked. You're releasing a monster? With a faint smile, Hugo replied, a lively one. Let's make this interesting. A heavy gate creaked open in front of Vikir, and a group of guards led in a chained beast. It was an orc, massive, muscular, its green skin stretched over bulging arms, its tusks glinting under the sunlight. The creature growled, its wild eyes scanning the arena as if measuring each onlooker. The audience erupted in hushed murmurs. Some of the young hounds exchanged startled looks. Isn't that too much for a kid? Is he really fighting that alone? They'll have to step in before it gets ugly, right? The tension in the Colosseum grew, but Vikir remained unmoved, his posture relaxed, his expression cool. Hugo raised his hand. The chains were unfastened. With a thunderous roar, the orc lunged at Vikir like a charging bull. Dust flew, and the ground trembled under its weight. But Vikir didn't flinch. He waited, judging the distance, calculating the angle, and in a flash, he moved. One clean swing. A severed arm hit the ground. The Colosseum went silent. Even the orc froze for a heartbeat, staring in confusion at the bloody stump where its arm had been. Before it could react, Vikir spun again, slashing down with flawless precision. Its leg came off. The beast howled in agony, toppling to the ground. The audience could barely process what they'd just witnessed. Gasps broke out. Eyes widened in disbelief. Whispers filled the air. How had an 8-year-old moved with such speed? Such decisiveness? And yet, Vikir looked almost bored as he analyzed his handiwork. He knew what was happening. The orc was panicking, not just from pain, but because it couldn't regenerate. Its C-rank healing abilities were being overwhelmed by the B-class hemorrhaging effect of the Hellhound ability embedded in Vikir's sword. Even the most resilient creatures couldn't recover from that kind of internal bleeding. From his elevated seat, Hugo observed everything in silence. His expression remained unreadable, his gaze sharp. Vikir met his father's eyes. He knew what Hugo was truly waiting for. So, without a word, Vikir activated what he had been hiding. His sword began to shimmer. It wasn't mere swordsmanship now, his blade was glowing, wrapped in a vivid red aura. The head butler stood abruptly. That's an aura blade. Low-class sword expert level. The other hounds stared in disbelief. In a flash, Vikir dashed forward. The fallen orc, struggling to rise, didn't stand a chance. A single strike. Its head rolled across the floor. The arena was still. Then, slowly, whispers turned to stunned silence. The young spectators were frozen, their jaws slack. He used aura. He's only 8. Even the head butler, normally composed, turned to Hugo, voice trembling with awe. My lord, we've just witnessed the emergence of a once-in-a-century genius. I doubt any house in the entire empire could compare. Hugo, however, was less impressed. His eyes drifted to the orc's lifeless body, and he noticed something odd: the creature's blood still flowed freely. He only won because the orc was already weak, Hugo said quietly, almost as if trying to reassure himself. But then, a voice reached him. Vikir's. With the same calm tone he always used, Vikir turned to face his father and asked, "Is there anything stronger?" The Colosseum stirred again. The hounds were stunned once more. He was asking for another opponent? A stronger one? They couldn't believe what they were hearing. But for Vikir, this wasn't about arrogance. He had a clear purpose. He wanted Hugo to acknowledge him. He wanted everyone to see the difference in him. And most of all, he wanted to prove that he no longer stood beneath anyone. Not even his father. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.